Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation went into effect on January 1st, 1863, during the second year of the Civil War. After at least 250 years of slavery in North America, tens of thousands of Black humans would finally experience freedom. Booker T. Washington said this in his book, Up From Slavery. Finally, the war closed, and the day of freedom came. It was a momentous and eventful day to all upon our plantation. He said, freedom was in the air and had been for months. Washington goes on to describe the unabashed ecstasy amongst the slaves, the singing and rejoicing that took place, how his mother kissed him and his siblings with tears of joy running down her face after their soon-to-be former owners gave them the news of the proclamation. Washington was born into slavery and freed in Southwest Virginia. Unfortunately, further south, the Emancipation Proclamation was hidden from enslaved Blacks in Texas. Since Texas played more of a supplies role in the war, not a lot of battles happened on Texas soil, and therefore not a lot of Union soldiers were there to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. So Texas continued to profit off the bloody beaten backs of Black people even after the proclamation specifically targeted Confederate states. Plantation owners neglected their legal obligation to tell their enslaved workers because they didn't want to lose the labor force, which according to the 1860 census accounted for 182,566 enslaved Black people. Texas joined the seceding Confederate States in 1861. The Confederacy's entire purpose was to protect the institution of slavery, which was worth at least $3.5 billion in the South. That is why half the country seceded and why the Civil War began, which would eventually cost more than 1 million American lives in 4 years. While the North was mainly going to war to preserve the Union rather than free all the slaves it did. In fact, this was part of a tactic on Lincoln's part to use his war powers to gain support from the border states and lure freed Blacks to fight for the Union. This worked, as according to National Geographic, 200,000 Black soldiers had joined the Union's fight by the end of the war. After that bloody war ended, Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas on June 19, 1865, and declared, "The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired laborer." Of course, General Granger was met with the same jubilee of the freedmen who were emancipated 2.5 years prior. Unfortunately, like their freed peers in 1863, many Blacks found it difficult to escape the same masters who had hidden their lawful freedom from them for so long. Once Black people were freed, they still faced so many hurdles before they could create their own class. Some people focused on finding long-lost family members, separated by the Civil War, or even prior to that, being bought and sold, and some attempting to escape to freedom in the North. Newly freed parents and elders had to take on the new responsibility of providing food, clothing, shelter, and a better future than they had. Seeking the little education and limited work available for them, they were overall eager to take on these new responsibilities, and many Black people made it a point to celebrate. In subsequent years, they added food, traditional music, and prayer services to the celebrations, and as formerly enslaved Blacks used their freedom to leave Texas and venture north, west, and east, the traditions followed, and Juneteenth became the most prominent celebration of Black American freedom to this day. It's our Independence Day. Many celebrations today are being held around the country as we think about how far we've come. In the wake of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, as well as the dozens of Black men and women who have risen to fame in the worst possible way, it can be hard to find the will to celebrate. But in the midst of extreme violence and oppression, Black Americans and Blacks around the world have always made it a point to celebrate. I mean, have you seen our protests? Have you seen our jubilee even amidst our mourning? Our Black girl magic and our Black boy joy. That's what Juneteenth is all about. It's about our perseverance, our joy, our traditions and our cultures, our faith, our hope, and our love. Today, I celebrate us, and I celebrate our freedom. Happy Juneteenth, y'all.
To dance.